well-regulated militia, being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of a people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. That's our Second Amendment. Pretty straightforward, wouldn't you say? Well, actually, it's not. We're looking at a government document. And government documents do not read the same way as you would an article you would find online or in an old magazine at your doctor's office. A government document is different in this way. When reading it, any pause or hesitation in a sentence is considered a hard stop. How do I know this? Well, for the last 25 years, I've actually worked alongside several government agencies. I would have to petition them for rulings on certain situations. In their correspondence, they would say how the situation reflects or how the law reflects on my situation. And in many cases, I would have to ask for clarification. And in most cases, if not all, they have simply stated any pause or hesitation or even just a stop in a sentence is considered a hard stop. So if that's the case, let's review the Second Amendment, which is a government document, again. And I bet you it is going to change the meaning to you. So let's start again. A well-regulated militia. Stop. What does that mean? Well, are they talking about Joe Sixpack, Mary Sue Sandwich Maker, or just good old Granny? No, that is not who they're referring to. When they say a well-regulated militia, they're referring to a well-trained militia, such as your National Guard of your state. They're not talking about the little ragtag, wannabe survivalists that are out there that are trying to cosplay and all that other stuff as, military. That's not what they're referring to. They're talking about your National Guard. That's simple. Flat out. Our forefathers had the foresight to see the need of small groups to protect their states and it to be trained. It is to be trained by our national military. That is what they mean by well-regulated militia. Not what you may think or what you see on TV. That is what is meant. It, in fact, is very literal. So let's move on to the second part, the second sentence of the Second Amendment. Being necessary to the security of a free state. Well, yes, a well-regulated militia, a well-trained militia, is necessary for the security for our state, your state. So, for instance, if, let's say, there is a natural disaster, what happens? The local officials don't have the capacity to deal with it. What happens? Your government, your state government, employs the National Guard to assist because they are trained and regulated. Regulated means trained to deal with that situation. Say you have a mostly peaceful protest. What happens? The local police, they can't deal with it. What happens? They call the local militia. They deploy the National Guard to help quell the crowds. That's simple. Now, if, say here in the state of Michigan, Wisconsin decides that they want to invade and take the Upper Peninsula, well, guess what? The state's National Guard is going to be there to defend its borders. That is the meaning of the first two sentences of the Second Amendment. Being necessary for the security of a free state, a trained militia is necessary to take on any disasters, anything that might harm the state, anything like invading from another state. It's actually that simple. Now, this is where we start getting into the controversial part of the Second Amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. Now, that's where they start talking about Joe Sixpack and Mary Sue Sandwich Maker, or even little old Granny. It tells us that us regular folk have the right to keep and bear arms to protect ourselves, protect our families, our property, and our livings. That's what that means. And also, it gives us the right to, if our neighbor can't protect themselves, we can protect our neighbors. Now, pretty straightforward, right? Now, this last sentence shall not be infringed. You don't have to go any further. That's saying that I can't tell you the means that you need to defend yourself or your home or your family. And guess what? That means you can't tell me either. My government can't tell me either what I can and cannot do and how I defend my family. It's that simple. And the reason why I'm doing this segment today is not really to just go over what the Second Amendment means. But here in the state of Michigan, our government passed new legislation on new gun reform laws. And what happened was, excuse me, it is required by law now here in the state of Michigan that regardless of the firearm purchase, you must go through a universal background check. Honestly, that is fine. I have nothing against that because honestly, it keeps firearms out of those hands that shouldn't have them in the first place. Very simple. Now, it doesn't stop there. Now, also, the legislation actually accounts for safety. All responsible gun owners must keep their firearms in a secured safe and where the owner of the firearm only has access. Well, if you think about that, wow, that just sounds like regardless of background checks and the safety, that just sounds like a responsible gun owner, a law-abiding citizen, exercising their Second Amendment, purchasing what they need or what they feel they need necessary to protect themselves, their home, and their family. Nice and simple. Now, one of the reasons why this was passed here in the state of Michigan, because in the last month or so, the news media has been reporting on several mass shootings all across the country. And this legislation was actually passed in order to placate to the activists. And the reason why I say that is because some of the aspects of this legislation, you can't enforce it. So, as part of the legislation, the gun safety portion of it. Now, if normally as a responsible gun owner, you're going to keep your firearms secured. Now, there are penalties to this if you're not doing so. You're going to get charged with a misdemeanor and you're going to pay a monetary fine. But my question is how is the state of Michigan going to enforce this? Are they going to send state police door to door asking to see said safe? They can't do that. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So, in many cases, a lot of this legislation that's getting passed statewide and, countrywide, how are they going to enforce it? Especially with these background checks. Now, the biggest thing is these background checks. Now, in 2022, we had 647 mass shootings. All right. Now, with these mass shootings, you're thinking, that's a lot. That's a lot. And it is. It's not a joke. It's unfortunate. But then, all of this leads to, what about all this gun violence? You always hear about it every single day. Gun violence. Gun violence. Gun violence here. Chicago, this many people died over the weekend. Baltimore, this many people died over the weekend. There's a shooting in Detroit. You hear about it all the time. Now, the reason why I'm bringing all this up is when you look at the actual numbers from gun violence and you see it, it's actually fairly shocking. And we're going to use the numbers that I had available to me, and that was for the year 2021. In the year 2021, there was a total of about 48,000 firearm deaths. That's quite a bit. Now, when we look at the numbers, 54% of that 48,000 was all suicide, self-infliction. And that's sad. That's too bad. It's unfortunate those people couldn't get the help they needed. And unfortunately, they went out that way. But then when we look at 43% of that is being murder. Now, what they don't tell you in here is that 80% of that 43 of that murder, that 80% was all gang violence. Gang violence. So tell me, using just common sense, how much of that gang violence, those gang-related murders, how many of those do you think were actually legally purchased firearms? There's a good bet that it's probably zero. Now, the other numbers, we're looking at, the remainder here be about, 20% of those murders. All right. The rest of those, domestic violence, one-on-one, or just one-on-one. Two people having a dispute, road rage. Yep. That is the remainder of that 20%. And then you see that little wedge of 3%. That's your 647 mass shootings. It's sad. And from this result, from both of these, all right, you have activists that are, clamoring for stronger gun control laws, stricter background checks, requesting mental health background checks. You would think that sounds like a just cause. Well, see, that's where the problem lies when it comes to background checks. All right. I want you to think about this. There was a study done by San Diego Health. And what they did is they pulled a random number of mass shootings. And in this case, in this study, they pulled this 35 random cases. In 28 of those cases, they all had undiagnosed mental health issues. And those remaining 5 diagnosed with mental health issues. So you're thinking, well, how were they able to purchase guns legally? Well, see, that's the problem. You see, that's where these universal background checks in the medical field collide. There's a thing that is called HIPAA, which basically are laws that protect the rights of patients and doctors. Now, recently, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources have actually passed a ruling on HIPAA and background checks. The thing is that they feel that reporting these mental health issues actually are not good for the relationship between patient-doctor. So that means if someone does have a mental health issue and they're being treated for it, it's not being reported to the proper agency. When the individual goes in and actually has a background check done, they will pass because it's not being reported that they have a mental health issue or the type of a mental health issue. So this, in many cases, is how individuals such as our shooter in Memphis and basically in most of our mass shooting cases that we've seen recently were able to purchase guns. You're going to try and say that, well, it's the background checks. No, it's not the people that are doing the sales. They're doing their part. They're running their FBI checks. They're running their local enforcement checks. The problem is the HIPAA laws that actually protect the patient from getting reported to the proper agencies so they are not allowed to purchase these guns. It's that simple. It's not the manufacturers. It's not the salespeople. It's just that there's so much legislation and so many legalities out there that it's almost impossible for anyone to enforce anything. It can't be done. You look at the Michigan legislation that was passed, it is impossible for them to enforce those laws because they would have to go door to door and turn it into a police state. And if it's not secured, they would ticket and fine, the offenders. So how are they going to enforce that? What, you're going to tell me if there's an accident at home in the state of Michigan, and yes, there's a safe, and somehow a child gets access to that firearm, that the parent is only going to be charged with a misdemeanor and a small fine? No, that's impossible. They're going to be charged for murder of that kid or the responsibility of the death of that child. So how is it going to be enforced? How is this going to be checked? You can't do it. And this brings me to something else. When you go into your background checks, and many of these activists that say that we need to get guns off the streets. Last night in the state of Texas, there was a man who killed his neighbors in a mass shooting, all because he was target practicing in his backyard. And guess what? He was using the scary weapon. He was using that spooky AR-15, and he shot and killed 5 people. How did that man get a gun? Well, if you do some research on who this man was, come to find out he was an illegal alien. He was deported several times since 2009. He had a prior criminal record for domestic abuse. And last night, when I was watching the press briefing with the Wayne County Sheriff and the FBI, one of the reporters asked him a very pertinent question. One of the reporters asked him, "What kind of gun was it?" And the sheriff actually came out and he said, it was an AR-15. It was the scary gun. Then another reporter followed it right back up. Well, how did he get that gun? Sheriff came back and said, well, it's either obvious because he couldn't have passed the background check because he was an illegal alien with a criminal record. He purchased that gun illegally off the street from somebody. Now, if let's say that the state law, just say that was in any other state where there is a ban on having weapons like that, having an AR-15 is illegal. We'll just say it. He's out there target practicing. He does what he does. He kills 5 people. But he didn't go through a background check to get that gun. How'd he get it? See, that's the point. That's the point. You have activists out there that are trying to hinder law-abiding citizens from exercising their Second Amendment right and blaming them and punishing them when you have killers like this purchasing them illegally and stating that they need to get guns off the streets. 80% of the murders that occur in this country are from gang-related murders. How many of those are legally purchased weapons? Probably none. Very few. Less than 1%, I bet. The individuals doing these mass killings, come to find out after you do the research and investigation, they all have mental health issues. Majority of them undiagnosed. How are they getting through? How do you enforce it? You can't. All of this is just to placate to those that think that guns are bad, that it's the gun's fault. So what are you going to do? You're going to put signs up everywhere saying gun-free zone? And that's what amazes me by activists like that. This isn't the movies. This is real life. There are bad people out there. Bad people are going to do bad things. If they're determined to do it, they're going to do it, regardless if you put a gun-free zone someplace. Or if you place a law someplace saying that, no, you can't take a gun into this building, or you can't, take a firearm into this county, it makes no difference. Bad people are not going to obey your laws. You're just punishing those of us that are actually law-abiding citizens. Law-abiding citizens. That's what you're doing. And tell me, how does punishing us make that better? You can never give us an answer. And all your politicians are going to do is placate to you and pass unenforceable laws. And the only way to do it is to turn this into a police state and ban all weapons. So tell me, how are you going to do it? You can't. So, but that's just my opinion. You go through what they provide you. It's all there in front of you. I'm going to have all my sources, all my links. They'll be in the description of the video. So if you want to check it out, check it out. Feel free. And I don't know. Maybe many of you stop dreaming and get yourself a little bit of a reality check and understand it's not the law-abiding citizen that's actually the problem here. The problem is bad people. People that are sick. People that need help. Because some doctor-patient rules and laws are keeping many people, I don't know. The big problem. And unfortunately, what you all don't realize, it's, you can't enforce what they're passing. Impossible. You can't do it. All right. I guess I'm done. When I saw this last night, it really did. It pissed me off. And I just had to say something. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully we'll be back at it again next week. Just remember, if you like what I'm doing for you, like, share, subscribe. I would appreciate it. And we'll see you again next week. All right. I love you guys. Remember, vote angry. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.